Shadows of Doubt is a game of trade-offs, the most significant of which is smack dab in the middle of its premise. Because Shadows of Doubt is a playable detective drama without the drama, divorcing the mystery and intrigue of classic detective stories from the fundamental act of detectiving itself. Procedurally generated victims, suspects, and witnesses can't deliver unique aha moments in the same way a more curated experience can, but it overshadows that limitation with an abundance of choice and freedom. The result is an immersive sim that's clunky and masterful in the same breath. A must-play indie title, even if at times it feels more like an excellent detective framework than it does an excellent detective game. The elephant in the room is that Shadows of Doubt is early access, and you don't need to be a detective to deduce that. Starting the game and generating your world demands a profoundly long load screen as your shops, streets, and all the random inhabitants and their complexities are formed. Far more pernicious is the fact that those complexities weigh on your experience after that initial load too. Shadows of Doubt is a game that buckles under your inputs. Weird bugs and flickering textures are frequent, but no flaws as acutely felt as consistent frame drops at nearly all times. You're in buyer beware territory if you choose to jump in this early in its early access period, which is something you may want to do anyway because of how damn well it delivers on its core fantasy. Complete immersion into being a detective is accomplished thanks to a huge leaning on immersive sim elements. Sure, it's got your typical events, and everyone leaves their passwords on sticky notes, but what separates Shadows of Doubt from its more action-y cousins is the fact that the highly interactive immersive sim tropes are both the means and the ends. Flipping through papers and documents and obsessively scanning any contact point for fingerprints are the mechanisms that move you closer to your goals of solving whatever mystery it is you're trying to solve. Whether that's just an attempt to ID someone and snap a picture, or performing a classic murder investigation. Your pause menu is a classic thumbtack board where the relevant topics, pictures, and the red string that links them are deliberate associations you need to make, letting you roleplay as that meme with all the straw grasping it implies. It works. It's a game of systems through and through. Power sources all lead back to breakers, city directories contain the name and addresses of all of its residents, and computers log email conversations and spam alike. It's tangible in that kind of way all the best Sims are, and it even takes it a step further by throwing in some minor survival game elements in there. Hunger, thirst, and temperature are typically pretty superfluous to manage in a game as relatively combatless as this one, and it clicked for me pretty early on that these mechanics are here for immersion's sake and not for difficulties. Cozying up to the fire on a cold night and getting a drink at the bar in between chasing dead leads became these persistent rituals I would perform when getting stuck, and they had their intended effect of pulling me in just that much further and giving me the same sort of mental clearing and thinking time that my character was getting. But a cigarette and a black coffee aren't your only resources when the trail gets cold. Because among the many hidden benefits to Shadow of Doubt's structure is the fact that you can just go do something else. Jobs aren't doled out linearly. You just exist within the few blocks of generated cityscape and need to make a living and can do whatever detective jobs you want to make that happen. In the almost cyberpunk world you inhabit, things are just near future enough to be reminiscent of our own world, but also just distant enough to have some sci-fi twists. For starters, the corporations that control our future have farmed out being a detective to gig workers. You just walk right into City Hall and pick up a murder investigation form that demands you identify the killer, but also gives you some optional bonus objectives, like identifying the murder weapon and motive. You can head to one of the local hotspots and grab a job listing off the wall for some lower stakes detectiving that's usually just the identification of someone out in the world or the acquisition of an important item. Your fee might give you enough cash to buy new equipment to help in whatever you were stuck on originally, or maybe you'll just passively stumble across relevant information because it all takes place in the same world with the same streets and the same characters. Also, you're a cyborg, which is both the in-universe justification for progression of your skill tree, but also an incentive to be checking every nook and opening every drawer. Because cyborg upgrade components are a rare but powerful secret you can find stuffed away in the most unlikely places. Options are aplenty. I remember one time I was stuck and needed to identify where a convenience store worker lived. If I knew his name, I could look it up in the address book, but without the name, I could always float over to the employee list and pictures that were mounted on the wall, or before I even recognized that option, I did the more conventional play of just posting outside of his place of work and waiting for him to go home. Far from a stroke of genius, but it feels like one when you're playing it, trying to stay out of sight and taking discreet peeks from the top of your newspaper that you're using to conceal your face. But I think what might be Shadows of Doubt's hidden virtue, its largest differentiating factor that helps it nail the detective fantasy so decisively, is surprisingly the procedural generation itself. I was a skeptic at first. I mean, wouldn't these mechanics and immersive sim elements be all the better in a more crafted and authored detective campaign with actual characters? It took me only about 30 seconds into playing to realize why that's not the case. Because sure, while there's no doubt a trade being made, you lose the ability to have any meaningful writing in a system like this, or even a beginning, middle, and end. Without a punchy resolution, you're left to just kind of meander about the world until you're bored, or more than likely, you solve the game by identifying the broad strokes of how its murder generation works. But for that first 15 hours or so, what you get is a game where everyone and anyone could be the murderer. When you're playing a more linear detective game or even following alongside your mom's favorite cop and lawyer shows, what you don't realize is all the little clues you're accumulating by the very structure of those mediums. Things like who the named characters are or what the camera is pointing at are direction and misdirection in detective experiences that are really just multiple choice tests when viewed through the lens of solving the mystery. In comparison, Shadows of Doubt is the freeform essay. It's starting a detective journey where the suspect pool is hundreds wide, and funneling that down is as bewildering as it sounds. You're unlikely to experience any thrilling twists during the revelation of a given murderer, but the path to that discovery is thrilling. With a robust toolset and a responsive world that lets you use that toolset in most ways you can dream up, Shadows of Doubt creates a sublime framework for detective wish fulfillment. It takes a highly interactable immersive sim world and systems and recognizes that they're good enough to be an entire game when done correctly, resulting in a title that's fundamentally about its little interactable details rather than letting them be a complement to a more traditional action focus. Subpar technical performance does cast a shadow over much of the experience, but the highs it delivers make it worth playing regardless, without a doubt.